video is about one of the epic stories in signals intelligence. And there aren't a lot of epic stories in signals intelligence that kind of make the regular public record. It's just not a part of intelligence that a lot of people pay as much attention to, I think, because it's just far less sexy. And, you know, the reality of it is if you live it, there's a lot of like patience and downtime and dead time, and that doesn't really make its way into a lot of movies. But I really want to go through this because it is fascinating and it gives a huge sense of the tradecraft of signals intelligence that is foundational to the discipline. It just really hasn't changed. So this is the signals intelligence video about the Zimmermann telegram. I did a video on what the Zimmermann telegram was and the impact it had on World War I a few weeks ago. But this is about the signals intelligence part of it, because ultimately this was one of the biggest signals intelligence successes in the history of signals intelligence. So, well, I guess from the perspective of the Allies, definitely not the perspective of the Germans. Okay, so picture this. August 4th, 1914, midnight, Britain declares war on Germany, okay? Before the sun rises that day, a British ship goes into the English Channel and cuts 5 German telecommunications cables. The only 5 Germans telecommunications cables, the undersea cables that go from Europe to North America and South America. Now, the underseas in 1914, the underseas cables were pretty new, and they were the safest, most secure means of transmitting communication. And those undersea cables, not the ones that the British cut, but undersea cables linking Europe and North America were important for dozens and dozens of years after that. They are actually still important today. Those undersea cables carried a lot of traffic. They were super important to secure communications. And within hours of declaring war, the British cut the German undersea cables. It's just like the most incredible thinking, right? So that sets up the signals intelligence program for the British, because now the Germans have to use cables that they don't own. So their best access is this cable that I think runs out of Portugal or something, but it's mostly owned by America. So the British are able to, through some wheeling and dealing, which the more human side of spying, they get access to that cable. And the other thing it forces the Germans to do is do a lot of wireless communication out of this station outside of Berlin. So that's the 2 main ways now for the rest of the war the Germans are communicating from Germany over to the Americas. And so the British were able to pick up everything. It's a lot easier to pick up over air communication. So they got that wireless communication out of Berlin pretty easily. And then they were able to, I don't know, they didn't really say like tap or maybe get somebody to tap this other cable that they used out of Portugal. So that sets the signals intelligence stage. So at that point, the British are collecting all German telecommunications that are going across the ocean. At the same time, through more traditional spying, they also get the codes. They get the naval codes, they get the diplomatic codes. So not only are they able to collect all the traffic, they are able to start decrypting a lot of the traffic right away, the day they declare war in 1914. So they bring in some cryptographers who, at that time are mostly like university professors interested in math or the classics, and they come in and they start decoding. So 3 years go by. Okay, now this is important because this is what signals intelligence is. This is the patience part. So all from 1914 to 1917, they're collecting communications, and they find out a lot of stuff about German plans, German intentions. But what do you use? Because at no point do they want to blow the fact and expose the fact that they're collecting all these German communications, because they're waiting. They're waiting for the thing that would make it worth it to expose those sources, right? They're waiting for the thing that could change the course of the war. So they get tons of information. Sometimes they can act on it because they can obscure the source, and other times they just have to let it go because they can't obscure the source. And that is signals intelligence, right? Being able to act on intelligence isn't always a guarantee. And obscuring the source is 100% still relevant today. So they go on, they go on, they go on. 1917, Zimmerman sends his infamous telegram. So now this is it. They think this is the moment. So they decrypt it. And is this the moment? Is this the moment that they can maybe sacrifice some of their, like covering their source in order to expose the Zimmerman telegram? Well, they decide no, because they can't guarantee that the US is going to get involved in the war. And that's what Britain really wants. They see that their time to fight this war is coming to an end. They don't think they can hold on for much longer. They need the US. They think the Zimmerman telegram is going to give it to them, but they can't guarantee it. So then comes another really interesting part, which is masking the source. So when Zimmerman sent the original telegram, it goes from Germany to Washington, to the German ambassador in Washington. He gets it and he adds like a header and a footer. And then the German ambassador in Washington forwards the telegram to the German ambassador in Mexico. So what the British do, now they forward it on 3 channels, okay? And the British pick it up on all the channels, because one interesting tidbit here is that the US President Wilson, because he wanted peace so desperately and he wanted to be the broker of that peace, he let the Germans use American diplomatic cables to send coded messages and didn't decode them. Like kind of fulfilled the gentleman's agreement there. But the British got those. So what they did was they were able to convince the Germans that the Zimmerman telegram that was leaked was not the original that Zimmerman sent to the American ambassador, which the British picked up. They were able to convince the Germans that actually it was decrypted once it hit Washington, and somewhere along the way to Mexico, it got leaked, because the version that they provided to the Americans was the one with that header and that footer. So one of the problems at this point, and this was a huge problem, was how to convince the Americans that it was authentic. And it's not just the Americans, the monolith, right? They have to convince President Wilson that it's authentic. They have to convince the American ambassador in London it's authentic. But the American people also have to be convinced, right? At that point, nobody really wants to go to war in Europe. They don't see it as an existential threat at that point. So because the British knew that the Zimmerman telegram went on this American diplomatic cable, they tell the Americans, here's when it was sent, go get it, go get your own copy. And then they provide the ambassador in London, like just for that moment, with the codes so the Americans can decrypt it themselves. So they can independently verify that this came through on their channel. So this was enough to convince Wilson. And at this point, Wilson really starts to change his tune about this peace and can this peace even be brokered? And he starts to really see Germany as more belligerent to the United States. But you can't tell the general public about this German communication on American cable thing. So that was immediately a struggle, right? And then completely fortuitous for the British. Zimmerman himself says, no, I wrote it. And that's like the one part that I've never seen a great explanation for. Was he a little bit arrogant? Maybe. Did he think it wouldn't matter? Possibly. That it wouldn't get the United States into the war, that the United States would enter, but way too late, because at that point, the Germans had also decided they were going to let their U-boats have the free-for-all in the Atlantic, and they were going to start sinking so many American ships, maybe it wouldn't matter. I don't really know. There is a thing that supports the arrogance, though, because the final bit to the Zimmerman telegram is that after the telegram got exposed, and Zimmerman said, yeah, I did it. And then, the coverage in the United States and like the press was just incredible. Zimmerman and others in the German government kept using the same channels with the same codes. So they genuinely fell for the copy that had been floated, the decrypted copy that had been floated as if that was the real breach. They continued to use the codes that the British had been able to break for, years. So maybe there was a bit of arrogance there. I don't really know. In any case, that was it. as soon as Zimmerman admitted that it was him, that he did send that telegram, that it was authentic, the sentiment in the United States changed like really quickly, and it was justification. And they saw that they felt that Germany was now aggressive towards the United States itself. So it wasn't just a Europe problem anymore. And the thing I love about this story is this is SIGINT in a nutshell. I mean, this is it. You've got the codes. You use HUMINT to get the codes often. You get the codes. You have to find, like, where can you tap? Where can you cut? Where can you get access? Access is so important. And then information just comes in and comes in and comes in, and you're decrypting and you're decrypting, and you find these probably, like, they knew about possibly the sinking of the Lusitania. Civilian ship. Can you stop it? They didn't. You know, at what point does one life justify breaking that source and possibly sacrificing thousands, if not millions of lives later? So this is a constant conundrum in SIGINT. You know, when do you break your source? And then can you get adequate cover for it? This is, like I said, this is still a factor. And what they went through trying to get a copy of not the original telegram, but the forward from Washington to Mexico, so they could leak that one. So it obscured the source a little bit and made it appear like it was intercepted and decrypted in the United States or en route, or maybe in Mexico itself, it got leaked. And it threw a bunch of shade on the whole thing, so it obscured the source. Still a factor in SIGINT. And the patience that you need to go through. I mean, 1914 to 1917, years and years and years and years and years of traffic. And then you get the Zimmerman telegram, you know? I really love that story because, like I said, it just kind of encapsulates the constraints and the challenges with SIGINT. They still exist today. And it's interesting to note that, you know, it's not the telegram itself that did the thing. It may have started that you know, state change, as it were, but there were a lot of people in the United States who were convinced that it was not authentic. It was a British ploy to get the Americans into the war. It wasn't until Zimmerman himself admitted it that the sentiment started to change. And that, I mean, we still have that challenge with SIGINT, right? If you can't reveal the source, like, how much information are we bombarded with every single day where we're like, that's bullshit. You know what I mean? Like, you just instantly dismiss things because we're bombarded with false information, misinformation all the time, and targeted disinformation, people trying to set us up, right? So so even back in 1914, like, you know to tune this stuff out. So you have to authenticate, you have to have valid sources. And these are all still challenges with signals intelligence. So the Zimmerman telegram, from a signals intelligence perspective, is really one of the sort of great SIGINT stories, you know, in a field that doesn't get to make a lot public, and also tends to be too technical and detailed and drawn out to have a lot of great stories. So I really love it. I think it's super interesting. Questions or comments, please let me know. And as always, I hope everyone is doing okay.